Hello and welcome, everyone. My name is Jessie Singer, and I am a senior strategist at Transportation Alternatives and the author of a 2022 book from Simon & Schuster called There Are No Accidents. Thank you all for being here today. And if you're just joining us, welcome to the Vision Zero Cities Conference. We are calling this panel Direct Action Gets the Goods, the Rise of Illicit Tactical Urbanism. Today, we're going to hear from some remarkable people. And I can confess, I've been trying to pull together a panel like this ever since I first heard about what these folks are up to. Let's get started. So in recent years, a new breed of tactical urbanism has sprung up across the US, and it's transforming city streets often and more often than not without the permission of city governments. Our panelists today are employing confrontational, illicit, and sometimes illegal tactics to redesign streets for safety when local governments fail to act. Today, we're going to learn about how these groups are dismantling autonomous vehicles, painting their own crosswalks, and traffic calming the streets that their cities choose to keep unsafe. But more importantly, we're going to learn about how these folks are organizing like-minded risk takers in ways that are autonomous, safe, and most importantly, effective. So before I introduce our panelists, I have a few housekeeping notes. First, because of the sometimes legally questionable nature of their work, our panelists today will remain anonymous and hidden. So you'll only get to look at my beautiful face today. And I will refer to our panelists by their organization name or their city of origin rather than their legal name. And since we're talking about potentially illicit activity, I want to note that this panel is for educational purposes only, and Transportation Alternatives does not in any way endorse illegal activity or encourage you to break the law. Each of our panelists will do a short presentation on their work, and then we will discuss and take questions. If you have questions for our panelists, drop them in the chat and I will monitor them and feed them over. Okay, that's all the housekeeping. So let me introduce our panel. First up, Crosswalk Collective LA is an all-volunteer group of Angelenos who paint crosswalks because the city of Los Angeles won't. Founded in 2022, CCLA has painted dozens of crosswalks across LA with a specific focus on intersections near schools and parks. Some of CCLA's crosswalks have been removed, others have been upgraded into formal crosswalks by the city, and many remain in place. The Chattanooga Urbanist Society is next. The Chattanooga Urbanist Society is a group dedicated to tactical urbanism through mutual aid and direct action. Last up is Safe Street Rebel. Safe Street Rebel is a San Francisco-based anti-car and anti-carceral activist collective that organizes direct actions and campaigns for safe and accessible streets for people, not cars. This 2-year-old direct action group has organized dozens of actions, including a viral campaign around self-driving cars, where people disabled AVs around the city by placing a traffic cone on their hoods. So that's our panel today, and each of our panelists is going to do a short presentation that lets you know how they got started and gives you an outline of their work. So Crosswalk Collective LA is going to go first. So I'm going to turn this over to Los Angeles.
All right. Thank you, Jessie. And hello, everyone. Thank you for having us. This is a great panel, and super excited to be here to talk about some of our work. So Crosswalks Collective is a group of people in Los Angeles. And I'll give a little bit of context, talk about some of our work, and then we can have a discussion around all of that, and more than happy to answer any questions. So as many people probably know, and Los Angeles is no different from the rest of the world, or the rest of the US at the very least. Car is king in this city. It's very dangerous to be a pedestrian or a cyclist. In 2022, 159 people were murdered walking or biking around the city by motorists, murdered by motorists and cars. And it's Los Angeles is a place where if you are asking for some upgrading for the safety infrastructure in your community, in your neighborhood, you might have to wait for years, or you might not get any response ever. So that's really the backdrop against which kind of Crosswalks Collective was formed in 2022, and just more generally a complete lack of responsiveness from the city or LADOT when it comes to community requests and community initiatives around improving safety for pedestrians and cyclists. And so what we do is very simple. We paint crosswalks. That's Crosswalk Collective's entire raison d'etre. We don't ask the city, we don't wait for permits, we don't ask for authorization, we just paint crosswalks. And I'll show you a little bit of what that looks like in practice. So we get together, put on some helmets, some yellow vests, grab a stencil, some paint, and as you can see, we try to make our crosswalks as realistic as possible, in the sense that as in line with city code as possible, so that they stay in place. And we don't have, we've seen in the past initiatives around kind of guerrilla urbanism, taking, some spray paint and doing a little crosswalks on the ground, which I think is great, but we also see that those are removed fairly quickly by the city. So in this case, our hope is that you can't really tell our crosswalks apart from the city's own crosswalk. You can see that a little bit closer here. And the finished product and what it looks like once we're done. And one of the things we try to do is to always emphasize the before after when we publicize our work, so people can see the change in visibility for the crosswalks, the change in marking, and how hopefully that catches drivers' attention a lot more than before. And we've done a lot of those. To this day, we've done over 20 crosswalks across LA. So this is another one. You can see this one is yellow. We love painting in yellow. In LA, if you have a crosswalk less than 200 yards from a school, it has to be painted yellow. So you can see this one is right in front of a school, actually in front of an entrance. And this was also a really fun one because the crosswalks, and I think the pressure was so great on the city to not remove those crosswalks that were just in front of a school, and it would have been so absurd for the city to remove crosswalks in front of a school that they ended up removing them, but on the same day replacing them with city official crosswalks. So even though it wasn't our crosswalk remaining, it was a big victory for us, seeing that it was our work that led to that safety infrastructure being installed next to that school. You can see another example here, and this is our latest innovation. I would say you can see that stop stencil that we've added. So we try to think, in addition to just a regular crosswalk, what else can we do to make this as visible as possible for drivers? And this stop stencil is in line with that idea. And this is a screenshot from a video that we shot where we actually caught the city live as they were removing some of our crosswalks. Those were actually the very first crosswalks we had painted, and you see how they literally go in to destroy the asphalt in order to remove the crosswalk, which is, again, ridiculous. But we caught that on video. It went semi-viral in Los Angeles and got a lot of public outrage and a huge backlash against the city for essentially not having the time and resources to respond to requests when people want crosswalks installed, but having a super fast reactivity time when they want to remove a crosswalk. It took them just a few days to remove that. So just the city exposing itself in how ridiculous it is in dealing with safety infrastructure for pedestrians and cyclists. And our work is very much community-centric. All of the crosswalks that we've painted, except for the very first ones, were responses to requests from the community. So we have those request forms in English, Spanish, and Korean. And to this day, I believe we've received about 250 requests from the community. And again, in the spirit of community work, we've published on our website a how to paint a crosswalk guide. So anyone can go to our website, have a look at that. We have a list of equipment that you need, some of the consideration on how to pick an intersection, and really a step-by-step guidance on how to make that work. And we've had a lot of people reach out across the US and particularly in big cities, to ask additional questions and say, hey, how can we do that ourselves? And then using this guide as a starting point. And this is us, Crosswalk Collective LA. You have our website and socials here, as well as our coffee. If you want to support our work, we have, it's been really important for us. There was an instance where we got ticketed, LADOT saw our work, or saw us doing the work, installing a crosswalk, called LAPD on us. And so the police came, forced us to stop the work. Thankfully, we were pretty much done with the crosswalk, so it didn't look like it was half done. And then issued ticket for injury to public property. And so in that case, the community came together and really supported us with some donation and some support to help us pay for those tickets, and also to pay for our equipment and materials so we can continue our work. Thank you.
Thank you so much, LA. That was great. So what the LA Crosswalk Collective does is really specific. They do one thing, which isn't true of all our groups today. And we can talk about the merits of that a little later. So we're going to work our way up in terms of scale with each of our groups. Perhaps the broadest scope of our panelists is Safe Streets, Rebel, and Chattanooga Urbanist Society stands somewhere in between just painting crosswalks and a more holistic community activity. And I think partially because they're newer. So maybe I'll let Chattanooga tell you about that and their work next. If you could take it away.
Thank you so much. Let me go ahead and pull up my screen here. We often say that the Chattanooga Urbanist Society has more in common with three raccoons in a trench coat than a typical organization. And we kind of came about by happenstance and accident. Well, actually, let me tell you a quick story. I was driving once. We're in Chattanooga, Tennessee, East Tennessee. Tennessee is a politically different environment than California. And so we can't use the same verbiage. We don't have the same priorities politically as some places that are more left-leaning or blue. So while different people in this organization have been showing up to city council and voting and talking and making videos, we hadn't taken any actual physical action before. But we came across this bridge, and it was near my house, and it was a 25 to 30 foot drop, and a section of guardrail had been taken out by a car, but the guardrail also served as a guardrail for pedestrians who use that sidewalk. The city put up some caution tape and nothing else and left it there. And I remember thinking they probably didn't do anything because of liability or funding or whatever. And then I thought, well, I could do something. Maybe I should do something. Then I thought, well, what about liability on me? And then in that moment, I thought, wait, liability is already on me. And so I talked to a few people and we hatched a plan. But before I jump into that plan, I want to explain some inspiration that made me even think I should do something about it. This is someone in our community in Chattanooga, Vidi. Vidi's a good friend of mine, and she grew up with food insecurity. And because of that, she had eyes to see it in our community. She had an idea to get a community fridge. And so usually where you would see a little food pantry, she was like, well, you can't put fresh food in there. You can't, like, shelf-stable food is great. It's a good start, but these families need fresh food. So she found someone to donate a fridge. It wasn't beautiful. It wasn't the best looking fridge you ever saw. And then she found someone in our community who would host it outside of their property. And this guy runs a shelter named the St. Andrews Center, and he agreed to host it there. She found some artists, got some people to donate wood, and made a shelter for it so that the utilities could keep up, and also made a place for a shelf to go. The biggest lesson we learned from Vidi was that, one, you didn't have to wait for permission, see what the rules were. You didn't have to wait for funding and save up a bunch of money. And you didn't have to be like a particular leader in your community to do it. She just did it. And she also invited other people to participate, saying like, hey, if you have time, money, go clean it. You don't have to ask, you can clean it. You can, if you're going out of town, look at what food's going to go bad and leave it in that fridge instead. But she also said, if you can't do any of that and you walk by it, take a picture, post it on your social media story. Someone else will see that it's empty and they will add to it. And so it was this sort of participation and giving participation at every strata of society that I was like, hey, I could do something like this. And what's funny is that this fridge has had copycats. And now there's 4 fridges around town doing that exact same thing, but they're not a 501c3. They're just people doing shit that needs to get done. So this was the bridge that I saw. That was the city or Department of Transportation's measures, a piece of caution tape at shin height, so it does more tripping than actual helping. And when we came up with the idea of the guardrail to put up, we were like, well, we don't want the city to get credit. So we created this fake organization called the Chattanooga Urbanist Society and made a video of everything that we did. We posted it on TikTok and it got 150,000 views. And here's the thing. We decided at that moment that this was very much a real organization, that there was movement behind it, and people were dropping different ideas on what the next project should be. People were asking how they could help. People were asking how they could donate money. And this was from nothing. So one, we started to notice the next troubling thing in our city was that they were removing benches from downtown. And we had hatched up this plan to start building benches for bus stops because we have 1,200 bus stops around town, but less than 56 with benches that are provided by the local transit agency. And the city started removing benches from downtown, not just bus stop benches, but public benches to discourage loitering. Mitchell Silver, the former head of the New York City Parks and Rec Department, was in town and said, hey, if you don't have enough benches, that's your cue to build more, not to remove what you have. So I was like, let's do something more performative. Let's make a big bench. Let's place it in the most popular bench that was removed downtown. And let's make a statement. I connected with a local artist, a street artist that puts up art all around town. They said, let's do it. We created this big obnoxious bench with the sign, this bench is illegal, but it shouldn't be. But actually, if you look close, there's a typo. This is funny because the day before we put it out, he decided to cover it with this reflective yellow signage and just rewrite it. When this bench would go viral, people would start saying, oh, I love how the yellow calls back to your first project with the caution tape. It was totally an accident. We did not, but we just were like, oh yeah, we totally meant to do that. But what's crazy is that this bench caught fire with the community because we took a play from VD's playbook. We said, hey, if you can't do anything, take a picture when you see it and post it so that we know a time frame of when the city removed it. But it got so popular and on so many local news channels that instead of the city removing it, the city replaced the bench within 72 hours of this bench going up. And the video we posted about this got 3 million views and our channel grew to 100,000 followers. We used this momentum to launch our benches for bus stops. And I want to talk about the 2 components for this. The first one was direct action. When you take direct action, we started to notice that it'll shape you as much as it shapes the space you're intending to shape. So like we knew as this group moved forward, there was going to be no substitute for doing stuff. Like we're not going to become a policy group. We're not going to become a nonprofit that helps other people do stuff. Like we're going to help as many people as we can help do stuff, because once you do that stuff, you're radicalized. You're going to keep doing it and you don't have to ask for permission. And then this idea of mutual aid, of inviting others to experience that same change so that you've activated a community. Direct action activates an individual. Mutual aid activates a whole community. I'm going to actually skip. Well, I'll say this. There's really 2 types of tactical urbanism, people that are making this change. There's this quick building, testing, collaborating with cities, which is good and needed. But I would say that we fall more in the riffraff category. We're just making shit and trying to help people out. And I think that this is needed sometimes to spur on a city's willingness to do the prototyping. All right. So let's talk about these benches for bus stops. The two benches on the left-hand side and the one in the top middle was this idea of getting wood out of a dumpster from a construction site that was going to get thrown away, putting it together in a silhouette that looks similar despite using different types of wood, and then getting local artists to paint it to reflect the neighborhood that it's in. So the one on the top left is right in front of an elementary school. The other one is on Martin Luther King Boulevard that was placed on Martin Luther King Day. And the one up at the top is celebrating one of our parks and one of Tennessee's biggest natural assets, which is caves. But then I want to point out the other ones that you see here. The one in the bottom was one that somebody saw our work, built something out and put it out in their neighborhood. This was near a bus stop where when it rains, people all go under this empty building's awning, but with nowhere to sit. So they built a bench and put it there. The one in the top right-hand corner was for for a bus stop that's literally a small grass median that's on a slope that butts right up to the road with no bike lane, no shoulder. It's just literally you're standing on the curb. That's the official bus stop. And so somebody went, put high visibility paint on it and built a seat onto the light pole. And then in the bottom right-hand corner was one designed by our someone who's on the board of the bus transit agency in our town. But in incognito mode, they sort of just started building their own benches as well. And the plans for this bench, I think it's called the Leopold bench. It's supposedly the cheapest bench that you can make from wood. You can find plans for it online and on our website. They've put up a bench a month for the last 10 months, and then recently just came out in the newspaper claiming them, saying like, I don't care that I'm on the bus's transportation board. I know we can do better because I've built 12 benches myself in the last year. So what's been powerful to see is because we're not an organization trying to take on all the responsibilities, people that we've never met face to face before are just doing the same thing. Now, benches have been sort of our forte, but we do anything. When a big storm came through and trees were blocking roads, the city would cut the trees to make a pathway for the cars, but still leave the trunks stretching across sidewalks. So we got chainsaws and cut up trees. We've picked up trash. We've done public education initiatives. And we haven't yet delved into crosswalks. We had been in the talks with the city about implementing some like official tactical urbanism, but the city's dragging its feet. So starting next month, that's when we're going to be going to Crosswalks LA's website, looking up their stencils and trying to take a swing at this ourselves. But I think the biggest thing that we've taken away from this is there's no guidebook on it. There's nothing official that we've done. We've just sort of gone out there and it's attracted people like wildfires. Like it's just spread organically. And we've even held a webinar for people across the country to start something similar where they are. And that's the end.
Thank you, Chattanooga. That was excellent. And I think, we're getting at, first of all, we're going to rename this the Urban Riffraff Panel going forward. But I think you might be noticing an interesting trend is that what all of these groups are doing to see success is they're doing two things. They're doing stuff and then they're broadcasting it. And they're doing stuff that is attractive and interesting and, isn't just solving the problem. It's solving the problem in a way that is like, a little risky and sexy and controversial, that is putting a spotlight of the public eye on their cities and those failures that the city is upholding. And so there's really a two-step process here. It's doing stuff and broadcasting it to, to inform the policy and to change how the city is operating. And we're definitely going to see a lot of that with our last group. So if I'm going to just turn this over to San Francisco now for one last talk.
Hello, everyone. I'm an organizer with Safe Street Rebel. Thank you so much, Jessie and Transalt, for the invitation. Safe Street Rebel is the anti-car and anti-carceral direct action arm of the San Francisco bike and transit community. We're a non-hierarchical group with no formal leadership or structure, and anyone is welcome to come and organize actions and shenanigans with us. We started out about 2 years ago when the city allowed car traffic back on the Great Highway, an unnecessary oceanfront road that was closed to cars for much of the pandemic. Inspired by the original critical mass in San Francisco over 30 years ago, we got together as friends, neighbors, and Twitter mutuals in a group chat, picked a date and time, spread the word, and got over 50 people to ride 5 miles per hour in front of traffic on a limited access road by the beach. And then we did that every week for almost 6 months, building the movement and keeping the issue in the spotlight. And now we have a commitment from the city for the Great Highway to be a permanent oceanfront park in the future. So while we're not an organization per se, we are organized. And that has allowed us to plan a ton of different actions and build power all over San Francisco. Of course, we love slow rides. And along with the Great Highway, we now organize slow rides all over the city to show people what a connected bike network could look like, and of course, build our community and recruit new organizers. We actually have a slow ride coming up this Sunday, and if you're in San Francisco, you should definitely join. We also love organizing and putting on street theater actions or shenanigans. The one pictured here is from earlier this year called Transit Smackdown. Governor Newsom's budget this year originally included a $5 billion gap for transit agencies, and if it were passed, it would have led to drastic cuts for transit across the state. So with the budget deadline literally days away and little political movement, we took to the streets to show people how bad traffic could get. We blocked a busy intersection and handed out flyers while someone dressed up as Gavin Newsom destroyed a miniature train with a baseball bat. And that took enough time to make a huge scene, but not enough for the police to mobilize or even respond. And it turns out that if you alert local news that you'll be blocking a major intersection imminently, they'll dispatch multiple helicopters and make it the story of the day. This created such a blunder for Gavin Newsom. The state filled the funding gap, and he even signed the budget on a BART train. That was a huge win for us. Next, and I'll probably talk about this more in the panel, our campaign to rein in robo-taxis was definitely our most viral one yet. If you didn't hear about it, the state allows 2 companies to test and run hundreds of self-driving cars around San Francisco with minimal oversight, and the city can't really do anything about it. So after feeling powerless as non-consenting beta testers of technology that fails all the time, spies on us, is orders of magnitude more inefficient than public transit, and requires car-dominated infrastructure to exist, we decided to take action and start a larger conversation around autonomous vehicles. And we did that by encouraging people to place traffic cones on the hoods of them, which disables them. So through viral TikToks and interviews with over 50 news outlets, this campaign turned a local story into an international one and taught millions of people the ways in which robo-taxis serve as an existential threat in the larger fight against car dominance and for better transit. We also made coning these things a TikTok trend, which was cool. We also hold vigils for people killed by drivers in San Francisco, where we hold space, usually by standing in the street for 1 or 2 red light cycles, and then installing signs that say, "A driver killed our neighbor here." We've had some success turning some of these into full campaigns with follow-up actions and email templates that put pressure on the city to take action. Next, the bottom middle is called Just a Minute. That was in response to the city's ridiculous inaction around a painted bike lane on a busy merchant corridor where gig delivery drivers would park in all the time. We wanted to protest this bad design in a way that didn't pit people against gig workers, but still highlighted the problem. So with pods of 6 people, when we saw drivers parked in the bike lane, we would go out and pause traffic in the car lane with a bullhorn and whimsical signs that say, "So sorry, just a minute," and create a safe passageway for people on bikes to get through. This protest was extremely well received in San Francisco and nationwide, and it actually got the city to install a separated bike lane on that street. Last item, we install lots of guerrilla infrastructure in response to fatal crashes and carelessly designed streets around the city. Like in this photo, we've drilled flex posts into the street here to take out 1 of 2 right turn lanes, fixing what proved to be a deadly design before the city did. This bullied the city into taking action more quickly, where they added additional flex posts and more visible turn calming much sooner than they promised. They promised to do it in 3 weeks, and we got them to do it within 5 days. We've also done a bunch of other guerrilla installs including a crosswalk recently inspired by the Crosswalk Collective, and a bunch of others that we don't really want to get into too much detail about since it might tip the city off and compromise our work. But if you want advice, please DM us and we'd be happy to chat. All right. I know that was a lot, but before I end my segment, I just want to highlight a couple takeaways from our 2 years of organizing. First, we've learned there's a huge difference between actions and campaigns. We found that, like with the Just a Minute action, we're really motivated to get in the streets and do actions and shenanigans that give us power, and we're really good at it. But what you do with that power is just as important as getting it. And we found that by having escalation strategies and working with partners and affected communities, we can leverage the power that we get from our actions and get our literal concrete demands met. Another takeaway is that this work is as much direct action and shenanigans as it is community building and hanging out with your friends and neighbors. To do everything we've done, it's required a steady pipeline of organizers, constant iteration, and knowledge transfers. This work can be emotionally taxing, especially when it comes to responding to traffic fatalities. So it's important that other people feel empowered to pick up things when organizers feel burnt out. All right, ACAB. This is really important now, I think, especially across the country. Police are the first line of defense for the status quo, whether that's protecting abortion bans or victim blaming vulnerable road users. With traffic violence getting worse, there are repeated efforts to try to solve it through policing and enforcement. But we know that at best, policing is an ineffective reactive band-aid, and at worst, it harms countless people and creates even more distrust. And we also know that when advocacy orgs do openly support increased enforcement, there's a huge segment of stakeholders who are then deterred from engaging or getting involved. So we think it's crucial that direct action be explicitly anti-cop, since police can and will never be as effective as concrete infrastructure. Car dominance is the enemy. I just want to include this because sometimes, especially after encountering awful violent drivers and actions, or just in general, we have to remind ourselves that we are fighting car dominance and the forces that enable it, like the petrostate, extractive industries, city agencies that uphold the status quo, and the police state. Individual drivers, especially workers, are also victims of car dominance, whether that's through traffic violence, debt traps, health effects, land use, and more. Acknowledging this is really important, and it's allowed us to be in solidarity with groups like taxi workers unions when our interests align on things like autonomous vehicles. All right, next, anyone can do this work, also accommodating all risk levels. For every medium to high risk action that we've done where some parts do carry legal risk, there are always opportunities for risk-averse community members to get involved. Like for the cone campaign, for example, there are people who are instrumental in that, including the person who made the viral TikTok, who never once placed a cone on a robo-taxi, but still wanted to get involved. So it's really important to create a welcoming environment and encourage everyone to help out however they can. All right, one last one, bullying works. At least it does here. Safe Street opponents in cities around the country have gotten their way by being annoying and insufferable. But we can also do that, but for good. Whether that's flooding public comment, being annoying online, blocking traffic at the same time every week, or just like putting up gorilla paint and bollards in the street, it's really important to show our electeds, city agencies, and our own communities that people outside of cars are worth fighting and taking risks for. All right. Before I go, I just want to talk to those watching who work at advocacy orgs, since we need each other to get what we want and build power. In San Francisco, while we don't formally collaborate with the established advocacy orgs, we maintain deep relationships that lets us tackle issues from multiple angles. For example, recently, a pedestrian safety advocacy org organized a rally at a dangerous intersection by a transit hub where a 4-year-old was killed, and a lot of us attended it. And once that rally was over, we came in and installed some traffic calming measures, like the ones I just mentioned earlier, to put pressure on the city to do something official. This wasn't really something we actually collaborated on, which gave them plausible deniability in conversations with city leaders, and that lets them keep their place as, quote, the reasonable adults in the room. But in these conversations, they get to point to our actions as evidence that the city is not acting as sufficiently or with the level of urgency that the public demands. So while our tactics and approaches differ drastically, they can still elegantly complement one another. All right. That's my spiel. Thank you so much. I hope by the end of this, you're all inspired to get out in the streets with your friends and neighbors and make positive change. I just want to emphasize that there is so much that we can all do across all risk levels in our communities to make our streets safer from traffic violence and improve transit. All it takes is a group chat, some motivation, direct action principles used by all sorts of causes. And yeah, if you want to get involved or chat with us about doing direct action in your community, please reach out to us. You can DM Safe Street Rebel on Twitter, Instagram, Mastodon, and TikTok. And for those attending the conference in person, I'll be there tomorrow and Friday. Thanks.
That was so inspiring and exciting, and I hope there are some New Yorkers in the chat just for personal reasons, being inspired along with me. So a lot of you have specific practical questions about doing these projects yourselves, and we've got only about 20 minutes left for questions. So I'm going to ask, if you have specific tactical, practical questions, reach out to the folks on this panel, on social media. They're all very linked up and would be very happy to help you on the specifics. So let's talk about some of the big ideas, the fuzzy whys more than the practical hows first. So essentially, a lot of the work that you are all doing is what your local governments should be doing. And this gets at a critical question, right? What role should a community have in creating safety for themselves? So are you filling in for absent leadership, or are you modeling self-determination? What does your work say about who the streets belong to and who has the authority to decide what streets look like? And really specifically, why do this instead of advocacy? Why do it yourself instead of, say, organizing the demand to get the city to do it, which has been for so long the tradition of transportation advocacy? Whoever's feeling inspired can take that one first.
I can go for it. So I think the first question, or the last question rather, why this and not advocacy? A big part of the reason is that advocacy is a win or lose game. You can put all the work that you want. You are campaigning for a particular piece of legislation or a new initiative, and putting a lot of time, energy, resources into that. If it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. And of course, you still kind of can change heart and minds, and you can still kind of push the movement forward. But if it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. And I think the idea with this kind of guerrilla urbanism is to say that there is no such thing as a loss. If when we plan a crosswalk, if it remains, there is a new crosswalk for pedestrians. There is a little bit more safety for pedestrians. If it gets removed, then we have demonstrated the absurdity of the city's policies around safety and how they approach community involvement and so on. And so it's kind of like there is no such thing as losing in this case. No matter what happens, we as the community perspective around that. And to the other question on and whose communities, for us there is a really big component around self-determination. And yes, we are filling in for something that the city is not doing, and we would love to be doing something else. But no matter what, there is no world in which it is fair and just to ask for permission to house or on the path that our children are taking to go to school. If the crosswalk is not there, and if we are moved to safety infrastructure where prevent right to do that, that would be a fair and just way. So for us, it's really an idea of like, these are our streets, these are the communities that we live in, and we should have a say in how those communities are built and what safety looks like, and we will be doing that no matter what.
I think, yeah, I mean, similar with us, Safe Street Rebel in San Francisco, we definitely have a love-hate relationship with the SFMTA, our city's DOT, but it's not an adversarial one. And at the end of the day, we want them to be, taking action and protecting people outside of cars. We're not some libertarian group that thinks that we can just do it for the city. And then also, back to your question, Jesse, I think we don't tend to choose between traditional advocacy and direct action. Sometimes it can complement each other. We'll do a guerrilla install or something, with just a minute, for example, and we'll connect that, those very visible and loud actions to like a traditional email campaign where we'll hand out flyers while we're in the streets. And then, when we post about it, we'll include an email link that gets like hundreds of people to email specific city leaders and agencies to advocate for or call for the change that we're asking for. So sometimes they can complement each other.
Yes, and this is Chattanooga talking. Yes, and to everything that's been said so far. I think one of our core mottos is we will work with anyone, but we're not going to wait on anyone. And so when proposals are put out or processes are put in place, the bureaucracy always seems to be in defense of the status quo. And the people who are profiting off the status quo, whether it's a conspiracy or not, that doesn't matter. If you're profiting off the status quo, you don't want to see it change. And that's the type of funding you're up against. And so when I see things and we've been told, hey, there's zoning changes that are going to help this, there's projects and grants we're going for that are going to help this, similar to Crosswalks LA, I want to say, well, then great, then you can change what we've done in the meantime to keep the kids safe or to get people to work on bikes. And I think the biggest thing that we've noticed is we want to be as cunningly good as what we perceive as evil is cunningly evil. Evil works. We always see evil as like working in the dead of night, trying not to get credit for what they did, working sneakily and hastily. And it's like, what if we could be that creative and that innovative and getting things done that help people? And so that's kind of our idea, is like being cunning, but instead of cunning with blood on our hands, it's cunning to save lives. And if the city wants to catch up and take a page from our notebook, we want to offer that to them, and we're never going to stand in their way for making permanent change, but we're just not going to accept the status quo.
There's a lot of questions in the chat about working with cities, dealing with cities in terms of the official government. How have city leaders remarked on your work? If you're working with the city on a somewhat official basis, how are you doing that? What is your process for building partnerships? And, what do you do if, the city and the mayor seem to be on board with the right things? How do you get over the fear that you're going to cause backlash that'll make things worse for your goals? I know that's kind of a lot, but I feel like everyone's probably got a lot of thoughts on working with the system or not. So yeah, I know you all have very different experiences and live in very different sorts of places. So maybe you can all speak to that.
For us, Chattanooga is a small town of less than 180,000 people. Ironically, we were nominated for the mayor has an award he gives out at the state of the city, and we were nominated, and they put all the nominees up on a PowerPoint. So he had to acknowledge us there, and he said some very kind words, and we've since met with the mayor. But he says all the right things, but pretends like there's nothing in his hands to get stuff done. So whereas we don't have resistance from the mayor, it also seems like we don't really have help from his office. So far, all of our press has been good press. And it's hard to get bad press when our city is failing so bad. So pedestrian deaths in Chattanooga are up almost 300% from last year. And last year was not a subtle year. It's a 10-year, it's a decade high benchmark. And the only reason it's not higher than that is the city hasn't officially kept records accurately more than 10 years ago. So things are so bad right now. we haven't pushed the envelope far enough to get bad press. It's only been helpful. It's only been good. And the local newspaper even started someone whose full-time job is now to cover transit issues, housing issues around town. And we have a direct line to them. So the PR has all been good so far.
Yeah, and speaking about like potentially creating opposition, so this profile image that is showing for Safe Street Rebel, that image was actually taken by this group called Open the Great Highway. It's an opposition group that wants to bring cars back on the Great Highway. And they just spent a lot of time focusing on our protests and not as much time doing like lobbying and sort of actual like advocacy for their cause. So there can be, even though we are sort of being disruptive, purposefully, it can sometimes have like a positive effect in terms of like distracting the opposition. And then back to like partnerships, we found that having good relationships or like building relationships with sort of the lower level planners in city government has been helpful on building solidarity with them, because usually opposition to like safer streets comes from like the mayor's office or like higher up like directors of like the DOTs who are a bit more car centric. So sort of working with them and making sure that we can make their jobs easier has been helpful.
Yeah, and on our end, I really appreciated the Chattanooga motto, like we will work with anyone, we will not wait for anyone. And I think that's also how we approach things. Our experience has been that all of the partnerships, proposals, or the attempts at collaborating that have come from the city or city adjacent organizations have always felt like an attempt to co-opt our work and to diffuse our work. It's never felt like, okay, let's do this thing together and move forward together. It always felt like, hey, we can help you, but maybe you could stop doing it like that. Or maybe we can, ask for permission to do this or that. And so for us, we really, I guess a little bit of background is that in our group, we have quite a few people who have come from a place of sitting on neighborhood council for transportation and trying to go through those official channels. And really, when Crosswalk Collective came about, it was out of the frustration of actually those do not result in much change. So we'll just take it upon ourselves to do the work. And I don't think we are going back in the other direction. I think we are only going in the direction of we'll keep our autonomy, we'll do this work. If anyone wants to join us and support us, that's great. But we are not looking for partnership. We're not looking for a relationship with the city. Until it makes more sense, or until they're actually in line with what we're trying to do.
Here's an interesting question. How do you act in a way that is democratic and takes into account the desires of an entire community as you're making these changes? And how have you dealt with or seen local opposition, not from government, but from residents or businesses that might be adjacent to the work that you're doing?
I can go first here. So since we're non-hierarchical, we generally operate on consensus. And people are sort of like welcome to voice their opinions about things, or if they have issues, like block potential actions if they have issues. And we've had to do that. Like we don't like Valencia Street in San Francisco, for example, the politics of that area are very complicated. So we have decided to sort of be very careful with how we engage with direct action on that street and in that area. So sometimes it's just worth not engaging or having subgroups. So we think we have a big spicy group chat of about 250 people. Not all those 250 people are going to get involved in every campaign. So we'll have subgroups for the cone campaign, for specific guerrilla installs. And yeah, sometimes it just means like not doing stuff. which is fine because like we have our work cut out for us. There's always too much to do.
I'm not sure we've run up against our limit yet. We're pretty new as far as this goes. I also think that a big portion of what we do is education. Our most active members that I say like show up physically are college students and from the university community. Because the university is downtown, it's a pedestrian community. They understand the importance of it. They have a strong sense of injustice when they look around the rest of the city. And so the biggest thing we've seen is just education. There's a lot of people who show up are like, I care, but I don't know why. And then after a while, so far people have just been really interested in whatever we happen to be doing. It is challenging though, because you can show up to a zoning hearing and at that zoning hearing, they're trying to build affordable housing. And then there's 20 people from that community. It'll be a not well-off community that doesn't understand that why does affordable housing always have to go into the poorest community? How come they're the only community that has no choice? And it's hard to find that line of like, okay, I want to stand up for affordable housing, but they do have a point. This isn't getting built in the nice neighborhoods. It's getting pawned off to the community that needs more support themselves. So it's really challenging. There's definitely tension there. But despite zoning, except for zoning hearings, we really haven't bumped up against any sort of opposition with people in the community that need something, wanting something other than what we're providing at that moment.
The way we measure support is really by how many people say kind words when they see us painting in the communities, and how many people say, negative stuff or scream at us. It's only happened twice, I think, that people had negative words toward us, but almost every single time we paint, people say, thank you for doing this. Most of the time they think we're actually with LADOT or with the city. So and the few people who have expressed some doubts or some negative feelings around the work has been, one was someone who had to drive around the block to reach their house, not because they thought it was not a good idea to have a crosswalk or anything like that. And it sounds like they would have screamed at the city the exact same way. And then the second time, I think was interesting, it was in a crosswalk that we were painting close to another one we had painted month before, and that had been removed by the city. And this person said, you do this, but then we, people in the community pay the price because the city comes around and breaks down the road to remove your crosswalk. And so, I think that took us back a little bit and caught us off guard. In the end, things worked out for the best because those crosswalks we were in the process of painting were eventually removed by the city and replaced by official city crosswalks. So we were painting 2 of them right next to a park. The city came around and painted 4 crosswalks right there. So it worked out for the best, but it did kind of made us think about how can we be more respectful about the communities that we work with. And a big piece of that for us is, again, I've mentioned during my presentation, that we respond to community requests. So we only go to places, or almost exclusively, where people say, hey, this intersection is really dangerous. I've seen people, or I know people who've been injured or almost killed. And so please, can you do something? And that's where we go, and that's where we do the work, always based on those requests from the community.
There are so many great questions that we're not going to get to. We have 5 minutes left. So there's 2 questions I think it's very important that we do get to. So just our panelists should try and be quick in their answers, and we'll try to wrap this up not too late. But we've talked a lot about how you do what you do and what you're doing in a tangible sense. But like the other half of this equation is social media, and that's a real tool for effectiveness for all of you. So if you had to give some brief advice to our panelists on not just doing the action, but using social media to create pressure, what would you share?
I can go really quickly. Number one is don't wait necessarily to publicize, just put it out there and eventually it will pop off and it will go, like viral at a local level at least. The media will pick it up. So before we went viral or anything like that, the media had picked up our story and started, writing and filming the crosswalks that we had painted. And the second thing is do not become dependent on a single channel or a single social media, because anytime you might have an egomaniac billionaire buying it out, and then reach becomes much more difficult, and there might be some shadow banning going on. So just make sure to build kind of multi-channels across many social media, so you don't find yourself in a situation where you build an audience and suddenly you don't have access to that audience anymore.
I'll jump in quickly here as well. I would also say find something that you can post about regularly, whether it's just taking pictures of things cars broke around your community so that you can post 3 times a week. Here's something a car smashed. If it's hitting an object that's where it's supposed to be, think about how it might hit a pedestrian that's where they're supposed to be. And finding something like that you can post regularly on will help you keep the algorithm satisfied, keep people around in between when you have projects or something to post about. So lowering the friction for posting by coming up with a concept that you can do repeatedly, I think is huge.
I do not have much more to add on that. That was, all those are very apt. I think just one thing to add is partnering with affected communities and people who are affected by the issues that you are trying to address, and amplifying them. Obviously, Safe Street Rebel has its own our own voice, and a pretty authoritative voice on things. But we also like to amplify other people in the community to make sure that we're not sort of taking up too much space.
Okay, so we're just out of time. So I want to do a lightning round. My greatest hope in organizing this panel was that people from around the country would be inspired to, follow the incredible model of these groups. So if each of you could give me your lightning round pitch to this audience and the few hundred people who are with us today as to why they should be copycatting your work and what they should be thinking about as they do it. Give us your best advice as we close.
Go do something to physically change the environment in your city, see how that feels, and then do it again, inviting someone else. And from that, something will grow. That's as simple as I can put it.
It's really fun to make changes to the street and the built environment around you. And you can make some of your best friends you'll ever have doing it.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing. It is so fun and it builds community. It brings people together. It's not just what we're doing it and the destination, but really the process and the journey itself is a really, really good time.
This was just the best panel ever. I could talk to you all for another 2 hours at least, but we are out of time. So everyone who still has questions that they didn't get answered, reach out to our panelists. They're all on social media. They did great things. And thank you to our panelists. Thank you to everyone who joined our conversation today, for asking amazing questions, for being here, and especially to our esteemed panelists for sharing their remarkable work with us today. Everyone take care, stay safe, and we'll see you in the streets. Thank you.